for a really great conversation today about the mind, the power of the mind. And to do that, we have with us Taji Huang and Cate Christine. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining this podcast. We like to start with a little bit about who you are. Let's start with your childhood. What are some of the powerful memories each of you has of your childhood?
As you know, we've talked about this before. I had quite a difficult childhood. I am the product of the foster care system. My father was incarcerated for all my life, and my mother, for the first 20 plus years of my life, was addicted to drugs. And early on, I learned about what safety, whether the environment that I was in was safe or not, and how to really quickly determine, my place in that world and what would be acceptable and what wouldn't. So survival was really important for me. And as I progressed in my childhood, it was about limitation. You can do this, you can't do this. You're capable of doing this, you're not capable of doing that. But my personality is one that if you tell me I can't do something, I am going to prove to you that I can do that. And I'm going to show you both myself and everybody around me that I am capable of doing that. And so what I used was where I came from, it fueled me. It became what helped motivate me to achieve as high of, the things that I could achieve in my life. But what I didn't learn until much later in life is that I used anger to fuel me. Right? Because we're taught, right, to pull yourself up by your bootstrap, right? To use that anger and channel it, right, into a different, in a different way and let it motivate you to accomplish all of those things. And later on in life, I learned that I don't have to channel anger, that I can be positive and that I can, release that anger and let it go and channel other energies to help fuel me so that I can become successful and achieve the things that I want to achieve in my life. So it's a bigger answer to what you've asked, but it does encapsulate what I stand for and what I try to teach the people that I work with, that don't hold on to anger and don't hold on to your past, because your past doesn't dictate who you become. It's just a box. It's just information, just one part of the story, and you can leave it or you can carry it with you, and you can be wed to it and be married to your limitations and be married to your story and really want to hang on to that and tell everybody that you come in contact with about these limitations that you've experienced in your life. And what does that help you accomplish? And what does that really do for you in the grander scheme of things? So that's a bigger answer than what you asked me. Mm-hmm.
So in terms of my childhood, I actually grew up with a lot of learning disabilities. And so I had one doctor say, she will never even graduate from high school. It is physiologically impossible. Well, that's actually not true. That's not true at all. Just because someone makes a judgment, even a professional who is a doctor who says this is that, they're going off of their limited scope of information. And that limited scope of information, every human is a little bit different. We have similarities and we have differences. So I remember sitting in the appointment with my mother and hearing him say that. And I remember leaving and I told my mother, no, Mom, I'm going to finish high school and I'm going to go way beyond that. And so at the time, if you're familiar, visual training was a thing in Southern California. And so we went through visual training. I did a lot of work on that. Our eyes, really, if people understood how much we can release and change, whether it be trauma or anything else, through our eyes, it is phenomenal. And so that's one of the reasons why I have my normal master's that I got in French and global management. And then I went back to school and I studied specifically neuroscience with rapid eye, with the eye movement of what all we can change and what we can access with the brain. So your question was, tell us a little bit about your childhood. There were difficulties, and I didn't choose to let that man tell me and dictate, no, that is the absolute truth. I chose to say, no, I'm going to overcome this and I'm going to create something different. And so that's part of also the message that I teach. I don't really care where you come from. I don't care what your trauma is. I don't care what you've been through. If you have a desire, a belief, then we can work with that and we can shift and change that. The brain can be easily deprogrammed and reprogrammed. Mm-hmm. Most people don't know that. Mm-hmm. They think processing trauma is really hard. Mm-hmm. It's not that hard. It does take effort and it does take work and it does take dedication, mm-hmm. but it's not that hard.
And with certain models of trauma processing models, you can, within 4 sessions, reprocess a devastating trauma like an assault or a car accident or, whatever you can think of that a person has experienced. I've had patients that were mugged and assaulted, and within 4 sessions of using rapid eye and EMDR, right, eye movement reprocessing disorder, that you can, like I said, in as little as 4 sessions, have symptom relief from that. But oftentimes, when Cate was talking, oftentimes what we find is that patients say, but wait, this is what happened. Let me tell you one more time about what happened to me. But I experienced this, but what about this? And it's really hard for them to switch their thinking, let go of the story. It's almost as if, for example, I tell patients, right, if you've had an assault or you had something happen to you and that occurred one time, but you told that story for 20 years to anybody that would listen.
Replayed it.
You've replayed it. So what's more damaging, the one instance that happened to you or the replaying of it? Because the brain doesn't distinguish between the replaying and the actual event. And when I help people understand that, then they're able to go, oh, wait a minute. But even then, it's still, it's complicated. And so we have to give grace, right, to help people get there. And it takes time.
And the thing is, if you look at it this way, just if you think about our freeway systems, like neural pathways. So if you're used to coming from Orange County to LA and you only take the 405, you have taken the 405 for 20 years. That is really ingrained. You know how to do that. And then you're like, wait a second, I can take the 5 freeway? What? I don't know how that feels. That feels a little uncomfortable. I'm used to going down the 405. And so it's the same way with the brain. Our brain is our operating system. And so when it comes down to deprogramming and reprogramming the brain and using eye movement, it can be in as quickly as 4 sessions, but the relief can be immediate. After 1 session, they're like, wait a second, I'm experiencing something different. And why? Because we're training them to use a different neural pathway. We're also training them to process trauma in a way that they didn't even know was a possibility. And that's when it becomes really fun because they're like, wait a second, you are right. I have been telling this story for 20 years. So it's not just telling the story. What are all those subconscious programs that happened at that point of creation when that event occurred? So we're looking at not only the story they're telling in their conscious mind, but also their subconscious mind. And we're doing a lot of cleanup around all of that.
So you're really suggesting to step out of the conviction that to recover from a trauma, for example, if that's the topic, you don't have to walk through step by step.
Correct. No, absolutely not.
So the issue is not just what the process is, but becoming aware that there are alternative processes that can short circuit in a positive way.
Absolutely.
And actually when you walk through it, you're reliving it anyway. And you're, as you said.
So that's the fun part. We do not have to relive it. We do not have to be re-victimized. And in fact, the way our brain is set up, it would like to create the best scenario for us. However, as human beings, we haven't always created that for ourselves. But with the new, I wouldn't even say it's new, because EMDR, if you look at rapid eye and EMDR, that's been around about 60 years. This is not new. It's not revolutionary. It's just not everyone is trained in it. And once you learn how to do that, I'll just say you're working with a professional who walks you through to process that trauma, and you may be using Brainspotting and some other things. You can process things so fast, and it's so easy because your brain desires that you have the best life ever and that you are safe.
And one of the things I tell my patients is no talking. Let's not talk. Let your brain do the work. Let your brain reprocess.
Okay, we're going to get into some of your strategies and how you work with patients in a second and how we can connect that to education. But if you don't mind, I'd just like to come back to what you said earlier about not being defined by circumstances, by people telling you who you are, things that were holding you back. Isn't there a paradox there, and that perhaps part of your motivation and drive also comes from those barriers that you converted into opportunities? I'm thinking of Michael Jordan's speech about thanking the basketball coach for cutting him because it actually turned out to be a motivator. Don't we need to lean into some of those experiences and make up who we are sometimes to gather force from them?
I think it depends on the person. There are some
And where
people,
you take that information.
Exactly, where you take that information, and does it fuel you to create betterment for your life? And there are some people who will go through that experience and they'll become more of a victim and a martyr.
Exactly.
So it just depends on the person. So it depends on your perspective. You may grow up with two parents who are very negative or adverse in nature. Just because they do that doesn't mean the child will choose that. We always have choice. And you may come up with extreme adversity, extreme egregious things. Just because that occurs doesn't mean you have to follow that same path. And I think that's one of the greatest opportunities about living in America, because we are such a diverse country, and you can go from nothing into something. You can go from something into nothing. You get to choose your path every step of the way. And I think that's the fun part. You don't have to be defined by, I grew up in this neighborhood, so that is the only thing I can have. No. You can change. You have an opportunity.
Yeah.
It reminds me a bit of the famous British philosopher, the empiricist David Hume, this bundle theory of the self, where he says, he was very radical. He said there's no such thing as causation. It's something that we imagine, which is a radical thing to say. And that ultimately our identity is a construction that not only have we created, but is created by other people who look at us. And we're sort of strewing together what happened in the past to create this mythical present. And you can reinvent yourself at any point in time. You don't need, when you look in the mirror, to see the you that was there yesterday. You can see a completely new you if you have the power of mindset to do it.
And if you have people around you who teach you that that's possible, right? Because very early on, right, your parents are the ones who teach you about the world and about your limitations or your abilities or things that you're capable. Don't do that. You're going to get in trouble if you do that. Or go explore, right? That's very early on. That message is being installed in you, and it's installed deep. And by the time you're 7 years old, that tape, right, that belief that you have of yourself, that when I say the tape, it's the message that you're telling yourself ongoing over and over, is really well ingrained. And it's important to have community leaders, teachers, social workers, people around you that also give you other messages and can help say, no, like, do you think that that's true? Do you really believe that? Or do you think that you're able to do other things? Give me examples of what that would look like. And it puts little seeds, right? We're planting little seeds and helping them to understand that they can create whatever they want if they just choose in. Every day we're making choices. I'm either saying yes to this and no to that, or no to this and yes to that every day. And it's up to the teachers and the leaders that are working with these young minds to help them to understand that no matter what message you're getting in the world around you or from your friends, you have to go inside yourself and ask yourself, do I believe that? What's my truth? What does that look like? And we have to teach them how to do that, right?
So you've organized this podcast series in part around the question of what constitutes intelligence. And there's something elusive that each of you is sharing that goes to what we should think of intelligence, not the brittle definitions we've had, but you're suggesting that, especially in a education setting where you were shaping young children
minds.
To think about what their possibilities are. It's not only reading about history or whatever the topic is, but you're suggesting that there are pathways that people should become aware of that are available to them to escape some of the profound difficulties that kids will experience.
Absolutely.
So I'm not quite sure how to put that into words, but it's fun to listen to.
Exactly.
Professorial. I thought it was very good.
And the traditional definitions, when we talk about emotional intelligence, social intelligence, right? Like, it's not just about math, reading, science. It's about how well I read a room. How well do I listen to that, my gut instinct about a situation? When you ask a child, how did you know to do that? I don't know. I just did, right? And how well we cultivate that, right? That's really important, because you can have a student that is really great in math and science, but their social component is lacking, and that will lead to difficulty if we don't teach that child how to bolster those social skills, right? So we do know already that intelligence is measured in many different ways and looks very different depending on the student or the child that you're working with, and that's okay, right? We speak to their strengths and we help to bolster, where they're in their weak areas, right?
And I think the part that's so helpful about all of that, when you look at intelligence, we don't talk about this very much, is your body intelligence. What is your body telling you? What are the sensations that your body is feeling? And I know we did an exercise the other day to help people and all the students start to understand, what does that feel like? What is the sensation in my body? What do I associate with it? What is the judgment associated with it? Because body intelligence, we're receiving information all day long. Well, with that, we're sending out information from our body and we're receiving information. Well, with young minds, do they know what that means for their own body? If my stomach starts doing backflips, what does that mean? Does it mean there's something not safe? Does it mean, hey, I feel uncomfortable here? Does it mean someone's angry and I can tell the anger is about to come out? What are they sensing? What are they knowing? And if someone is fully embodied in their body, so their spirit's in their body, and they can detect and that information to say, oh, you know what? I feel at ease. I feel relief. I feel like I'm in a safe environment. That makes the body relax so they can learn. It's a great environment to learn in. But if they're feeling on edge, something's not right, I feel uncomfortable, what is that? That's also information. Do they know how to interpret that? And then also tell their mind, you know what? I'm having backflips in my stomach. Is it that I'm physically ill, or am I picking up that something's not quite right in this environment or this situation? So that body intelligence, I would say, is a key component, not just for young minds, I would say for all minds, because it's emotional intelligence, it's physical, it's spiritual, it's also your body. Our body's getting all this information all the time.
We don't teach that enough. How often have you had a conversation with somebody about what is your body telling you? But we know it's in the zeitgeist because we've heard stories where somebody was in a dangerous situation and they're like, something wasn't right and I decided not to go. And they decided not to go, and the next day they find that, there was a reason that their body was telling them. So imagine if we harnessed that and did some meta-analytic studies and said, what is that? What is that you were sensing that made you listen to that voice or listen to your body? And how do we harness that and teach people how to really develop it? And that's what Cate and I do, right? We teach people how to listen to their bodies, understand what information is theirs and what information is somebody else's or doesn't have anything to do or is just information. But I'd like to do that on a larger scale, because I think if we started that with young children and taught them how to determine safe or unsafe situations, to listen to what their body is telling them, to switch gears and change based on what the information that their body is giving them. Imagine how much more successful these kids would be in the future in their lives in terms of their decision-making skills.
I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but could you just briefly comment on something I've been looking at quite a bit lately? Understanding and recognizing vagus nerve signals. Does that play into what you're talking about?
It does play.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it absolutely does play into it.
I don't want to get too technical. But
it absolutely does, because if you look at the vagus nerve, it's giving us information. Our whole body receives information. And then
Think of us like an antenna. We're
exactly.
an antenna.
We are a radio antenna. We are emanating signals all day long, and we're picking up signals all day long. Now, if you harness the power of the mind, then you can intentionally create. You can also intentionally uncreate. And so the vagus nerve plays a part of that. So part of what I do is I teach a 4-day. I teach people how to use their body and their brain to activate their intuition. So it activates, from a neuroscience perspective, their clairvoyance, their clairaudience, their clairsentience, their claircognizance. And so some people are like, that's woo-woo. I'm like, no, it's literally using your whole brain. When you use your whole brain from a neuroscience perspective, we are able to access more information, and so that you know what's happening. I had someone go through the 4-day, and she went back to her corporate job. 3 days later, she called me and said, Cate, I sat in the conference room and I knew what everyone was thinking, and I didn't know what to do. And it was really fascinating.
Radical idea, huh?
I know, radical, right? So the thing is, she said one person, they were thinking, I got in a fight with my husband. How am I going to handle this when I get home? The other person was thinking, I got to pick up my kid early. I've got to take him to here. Every person was not, they were physically in the room, but their mind was elsewhere and thinking about other things. And so she said, what do I do in that situation? I said, that's only information. It's not right or wrong or good or bad. It's information. So then you can direct the attention to what you're having to do. So here's our clear objective. Here's our agenda. This is what we want to cover because we'd like to make this decision. It's like, hey, everyone, remember we're right here for this. And so, well, what do we do with this? Well, if everyone is really activated with their intuition and using their whole mind in this way, what could we create for betterment?
We all know that we only use a very small percentage of our brain. And I think it's really interesting that we've been trained very early on to think that these things are not possible, that is not possible in the physical realm that we live in. But I think with the technology and as we are advancing and we're looking at quantum mechanics and quantum physics, right, where they're stimulating a cell here, and the sister cell is responding, and it could be 2 miles, thousands of miles, it doesn't matter, away, and it responds as if it were the one that was stimulated in the exact same way, suggesting that space and time has no bearing on the reaction of that particular cell. Now, this is just, they're beginning to look at this and to do studies to show us that this is possible. But I think, we need to keep our minds open and to understand and to recognize that we're just on the tip of the iceberg in terms of what our capacities and capabilities are.
Okay, so let's go from here to a question we like asking our guests, which is, what's your definition of intelligence? Give us a fairly short definition of intelligence.
I'm going to take a minute. Give me a minute.
I know, I'm thinking about that because it's all-encompassing. Intelligence, when you look at the mind-body system, we have so much information in the mind-body system, and then we receive information outside of us. However, societally speaking, many of us have been taught that when we receive information through our body or our mind, it's not socially acceptable to say that or to share that information. However, we do have that intelligence. And depending upon the person, if they feel empowered, that they'll say, you know what? My body says, don't get on the freeway right here. We're going to go 2 blocks down and get down the freeway. There's some body and mind intelligence. They're choosing to exercise in that capacity. Well, I have had that happen many times. Well, little did I know, there was an accident that was just about to happen that I completely missed. So when we look at intelligence, it's very encompassing.
I would say that intelligence is the individual's ability to take in, manipulate, and what they do with information. So how do I do in novel situations? How do I do in situations that I'm very comfortable with? What do I do with that information? How do I manipulate it and change it so that I can master or make the best of any given situation or circumstance at any time, at any one time, is how I would look at intelligence.
Was getting into decision-making, which is typically something we don't teach in schools.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that because I was just thinking like somebody can do really well with a well-route information, something that I do all the time. I do great with that. But give me a novel situation and I don't do well with that, right? And so that is also a measure of intelligence. So to be well-rounded is to be able to be in both situations, novel and, right, rehearsed, well-root information, and be able to, make adjustments as needed on off the fly if you need to.
Exactly. So if we go back to the analogy of if you're used to just going down one neural pathway, similar to a freeway, I'm used to only going down the 405. I only know how to do that. Well, now the 5 is shut down. There's construction. What do I do? Where do I go? How do I operate in that scenario? Do I find another freeway? Do I take side streets? What do I do? And how do I...
tells me.
Exactly.
But that's a problem.
Yeah. And how do I act or react? And do I all of a sudden go into nervousness or worry or doubt or fear? Or do I go into, hey, you know what? I got this. I know how to easily operate in something other than the standard situation.
Or maybe you don't actually have it, but you recognize that you're going to work through it.
Absolutely.
Either way.
So there's choices.
There are choices, and I think part of building intelligence is building the capacity to recognize that you have choices and creating these the cognitive affective
Yes.
strategies to find the strategies that might
Taking
work.
in new information, novel situations, being able to manipulate that information and come up with a new alternative that's going to work more effectively for you in any given situation, right?
You know, I'm tracking with this, but I'm still stuck a little 10 minutes in the past on Schrodinger's personality, being here and not being there. So I just want you to know I'm held up.
Okay,
Please
yeah.
go ahead.
Okay,
catch
well,
up.
before we get into Schrodinger's cat, and let's not go there. Let's go there and not go there.
Well said.
So how do we put this into action in an education setting? What do you think should be happening in schools is not happening to evoke this type of intelligence?
You know, I would like to see that we start off, number one, with a culture of kindness. And what I mean by a culture of kindness is teaching students how to be kind to themselves, right? And kind to others, listening to their bodies, listening to when they feel safe and when they don't, and having the agency. And we teach them to have the agency to be able to communicate that information to another student, to a teacher, to whomever, that I don't feel safe in this situation, or this doesn't feel good, or I don't like it, Jimmy, when you touch me, right? Like, I don't like to be touched, and to be able to have that space to do that. So, you know, we have in the past looked at, and this is shifting the conversation a little bit, but we have in the past looked at, oh, kids will just be kids, and bullying is just kids being rambunctious. And we just know now that that's just not true, right? And that has long since changed. But I do think that it is important to talk to kids about being kind to themselves and kind to others. And what does that really look like? You know, if we're teasing, if we're making fun of, if we're laughing at somebody's limitations, or somebody said something in class that was like not quite right? Like, and we all laugh, is that okay? And what does that make that person feel like when we do that, or when that happens to them? And will that make that person be less likely to speak up in class?
Right.
Because every time I speak up in class, the tape that starts running is when I speak up in class, people laugh, or people don't understand, because maybe that person's brain works a little bit differently, and they come at a solution in a different way, non-traditional way, and the other students are like, well, that's ridiculous, or that doesn't make sense, and they dismiss that. So that's what I mean when I say, like, talking about and teaching and starting with kindness. And then from there, we can evolve into other conversations. But if we don't have that, we don't have a foundation.
Taji, Cate, thank you for this. It's been fantastic. We're feeling great. We're feeling
I'm still in the mode, but please go ahead.
we're feeling ready to take on the world right now. And this was a great conversation, a lot of wisdom, and some great insights for what we can be doing in schools to connect every learner with themselves even more.
Very
Thank you so much
optimistic.
for having us. Yeah. We have to start with optimism, right? That's step one.
Yes.
Right? It starts with an idea.
Thank you.
And then how much fun can you have? And what can this change?